Chapter 1: A Family Invitation. My brother once told me I was too paranoid for my own good. "You need to get out of your head," he'd say, swiping a hand through his sun-bleached hair, laughing easily at my worries. Mike was always the golden child, confident, loud, quick with a joke. I was the opposite, anxious, distant, always wearing gloves to avoid the terrifying glimpses I caught whenever I touched someone's bare skin. I never liked to be touched. That's the number one rule in my life. It has been ever since I was 7, when I discovered my gift, or curse, of seeing people's memories if my skin so much as brushed theirs. The images arrived in sudden, overwhelming flashes. Some were harmless, birthday parties, vacations. Others revealed heartbreak or betrayal. And sometimes, dark things. Things no child should have to witness. My parents treated it like a disease. If I couldn't control it, I'd have to hide it. So I wore long sleeves and gloves, avoided human contact, and lived like a strange outsider in my own home. Over time, the gloves became a boundary, a small protective barrier that told the world, "Stay away." Mike was different. He hugged freely, patted shoulders, joked around. He was everything I wasn't. When he invited the family over for a barbecue, yet another party he'd thrown on a whim, my first instinct was to decline. I hated gatherings, let alone with aunts and uncles who asked prying questions. But my therapist insisted. "It's your brother. He's family. You're making progress isolating the triggers for your anxiety. Try going." So I said yes. That's how I found myself, on a warm Saturday afternoon, standing on Mike's front porch, staring at the old farmhouse he'd bought a year ago. It was picturesque enough. White clapboard siding, hanging plants on the porch, broad yard with a giant oak tree. My heart pounded, though, because I knew they would all be there, relatives, cousins, friends from out of town. And I knew Mike, he'd want me to socialize. I stood at the threshold, taking a deep breath, gloved hands gripping the strap of my purse. Before I could knock, Mike threw the door open with a big grin. "So glad you could make it," he shouted, arms outstretched for a hug. I flinched slightly, an old habit. He noticed, of course. Hey, Mike," I said, raising a hand in a cautious wave. A gloved handshake would have to suffice. Mike's broad smile waned a bit, but he knew better than to argue. He clasped my hand briefly, his skin only touching the thick material of the glove. "Long time no see," he said, ushering me inside. "It's good you came. Seriously." The immediate waft of grilled onions and spiced meat told me he'd been cooking for a while. I followed him down the hallway toward the back of the house, where the large living room opened to a sprawling backyard. Through the sliding glass doors, I saw what felt like half our extended family sprawled across lawn chairs, coolers of drinks, folding tables piled with condiments. Our Aunt Barbara's riotous laughter drifted in through the open windows. Mike patted my shoulder gently, always gentle, always trying. "Do me a favor and mingle, yeah? I need to get back to the grill. Burgers will be ready soon." He dashed off, leaving me to navigate the gauntlet of greetings alone. I tugged the cuffs of my sleeves down, making sure no skin was exposed. Then I headed outside, plastering on what I hoped resembled a friendly smile. The sun was bright, the sky almost painfully blue. "Look who's here!" Aunt Tricia yelled from a folding chair. Her red curls bounced as she beckoned me over. "Your father said you were coming, but I couldn't believe it." Yes, that was me. Always the disappearing act, always rumored to show, but rarely attending. I braced myself for the usual questions. "Are you dating anyone? When are you going to buy a house? You still wearing gloves in this heat?" I saw Uncle George, a beer in hand, nodding at me. My cousins were tossing a football in the yard. Children I barely recognized squealed as they chased each other around. and beneath the shade of the oak tree, Mom and Dad sat, sipping iced tea and pretending not to stare. I waved stiffly, feeling sweat bead at my temples. The day was warm, but the real heat came from my anxiety. I found a folding chair near the back edge of the group, hoping no one would notice me. Just endure it, I told myself. A few hours, then you can leave. Yet inevitably, the questions came. Still living in that apartment? Yes, Aunt Tricia. And you're still wearing those gloves? Uncle George asked, brow wrinkled in confusion. Yes, Uncle George. The gloves are for a personal reason. You're not cold, are you? It's 80 degrees out. Aunt Barbara teased. I forced a laugh. No, not cold. I'm fine. Thankfully, I noticed Mike stepping onto the back porch. He clanged a spatula on the metal railing. All right, everyone. Burgers are ready in just a few minutes. We've got cold drinks inside, so help yourselves. Or ask my lovely sister here to hand them out. He gave me a playful wink. I rolled my eyes, but inside, I was grateful for the distraction. People started moving toward the table laden with chips, buns, relish, and fresh vegetables. I sighed and let my gaze sweep across the yard. Now that the barrage of small talk had ceased, a pang of guilt surfaced. Maybe I didn't come around enough. This was my family, and they were messy, sure, but at least they cared enough to ask about me. I breathed in the sweet smell of freshly cut grass and tried to relax. Even if Mike's barbecue was an attempt to distract from his latest breakup, he'd parted ways with some girlfriend I'd only met once. Maybe there was nothing sinister about it. Sometimes, it's nice to be wrong. Chapter 2. The First Flash. Mike's voice boomed across the yard as he flipped burgers on the grill. My uncles were already lining up, beers in hand. Aunt Tricia and Barbara rummaged through the table, prepping plates. I ended up near the drinks cooler, handing out cans of soda or beer whenever someone asked. I tried to avoid any accidental touches. If a gloved hand brushed someone's bare arm, it wasn't enough to trigger a vision. The gloves insulated me from contact, but if the corner of my sleeve slipped and my wrist tapped someone's skin, it had happened before, and the resulting images could be anything: a happy memory, a heartbreak, or something far worse. I once touched a coworker by accident and saw a memory of her father's funeral. I had to lock myself in the bathroom for 20 minutes to process the wave of grief that hit me. So I was careful. I held out the beer cans with my gloved fingertips, offering quick, polite smiles. For about half an hour, I succeeded in staying calm, blending in, ignoring the stares. I heard my name a few times in whispered side conversations, but I pretended not to notice. Finally, Mike called out, "All right, y'all, food's done." He grinned triumphantly, brandishing a platter stacked with thick, juicy burgers. The smell was mouth-watering. Even I had to admit he knew how to season meat well. One by one, the relatives approached, building their burgers with lettuce, tomato, cheese, relish, or mustard. Then, plates in hand, they found seats on folding chairs or the grass. I approached the grill. "Hey," I muttered, leaning in. You made any turkey or veggie burgers?" I tried to keep my voice low. Meat never sat well with me at big gatherings. With my hyperactive senses, sometimes I picked up weird vibes. Then again, maybe that was just me. "Got a few turkey patties in the freezer," Mike said, winking. "But come on, you can trust your bro's cooking. This is the real stuff." I forced a smile. "Sure, why not?" I carefully took a regular burger from his platter, making sure our hands didn't touch. An uneasy sense flickered in my gut, but I told myself it was just the usual social anxiety. I toasted a bun, grabbed a dollop of mustard, then picked a seat off to the side where I could observe the entire yard. The others were already devouring their meals, chattering away. Mom eyed me from across the lawn, clearly wanting to come over and pester me about my love life, or my gloves, or my living situation. I preemptively took a big bite of the burger, feigning intense focus on it. That deterred her. She instead resumed talking to Aunt Barbara, and I overheard them gossiping about a cousin's new girlfriend. I chewed. The burger was surprisingly good. Smoky, juicy. I took another bite, letting my gaze wander over to Mike, who was deep in conversation with one of our cousins, Jared. They were laughing, talking about Jared's new job, and then the question came up. "So what happened with your old lady?" Jared asked Mike. "I thought she'd be here today." Mike shrugged. "It didn't work out," he said quietly, taking a huge bite of burger. "But we're still in touch." Still in touch. I rolled my eyes. Typical Mike. He burned through girlfriends like fireworks. Bright, intense, over fast. I tried not to judge, but it was tough not to envy his ease with relationships. While I struggled with even the mildest friendly handshake, he never had trouble forging connections, intimate or otherwise. I turned my focus back to my own meal. Just as I swallowed another mouthful, a wave of nausea hit me. For a split second, I swore I felt the presence of someone female. She was terrified, screaming soundlessly. I blinked, and the feeling vanished, leaving me dizzy. I sat up straighter, eyes flicking around the yard. It was full of chattering relatives. Nobody looked upset or in pain. It must have been my imagination, or a random anxiety spike. Right? A few minutes passed as I forced down more burger. Calm down, I told myself. You're safe here. The bright sun, the clink of beer bottles, the chatter of kids. All normal. Then it happened again, stronger. This time, I had the distinct vision of a woman's face, eyes wide with terror, as if staring at someone behind me. My chest tightened. "What?" I mumbled, gripping the edge of my chair. I saw more images, flickering like a broken film reel. A cramped space, cold metal, ropes around wrists. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then a face. My brother's face, twisted with a grin so wicked I almost didn't recognize him. "Hey, you okay?" The voice snapped me out of it. It was Aunt Barbara, eyes creased with concern. She reached a hand toward me, maybe meaning to feel my forehead. I jerked away. Sorry," I stammered, forcing a small laugh. "Just a bit hot. Might need some water." I stood on unsteady legs and made my way back toward the house, ignoring Aunt Barbara's quizzical stare. I nearly tripped on a garden hose, cursing under my breath. The moment I stepped inside, the cooler air washing over me, I let out a shaky breath. What the hell was that? It wasn't a contact flash. I hadn't touched anyone. Could it be the trauma from the crowd, stirring random illusions? But it had felt so real. I wandered into the quiet living room, sinking onto the couch. My gloves felt too tight, so I peeled them off and massaged my sweaty palms, trying to slow my breathing. The images lingered, a phantom knife glinting, rough hands dragging a woman by the arm, machinery whirring. And in all those quicksilver flashes, Mike's face hovered like a vulture. I swallowed hard. Could it be my brother was in trouble? Or was he causing trouble? My mind spun. I thought of all the breakups he'd had over the years, girlfriends who seemed to vanish from the family's radar, never to appear again at gatherings. He always said, "We're still cool," or "We're still in touch," but I never asked for details. Maybe I should have. I felt sick, not just because of the visions, but because part of me wanted to believe it was pure nonsense. Some psychological meltdown triggered by the crowd. If the alternative was that my brother was some kind of monster, I pressed my forehead into my hands, inhaling and exhaling slowly. Focus. Ground yourself. Visualize a safe place. That's what my therapist always said. But how could I feel safe in a house that suddenly seemed haunted by horrors? I heard footsteps behind me. I jolted, spinning around to see Mike standing in the living room doorway. He was holding a plate with a half-eaten burger, eyebrows raised in concern. "Hey, you all right?" I forced a nod. "Yeah, just feeling a little off," I muttered. "Maybe it's the heat." His gaze flicked to my unloved hands. He didn't comment on that, but he did ask quietly, "Need me to drive you home?" I hesitated. My mind screamed yes, get out now. But another voice scolded me, "If you leave, you'll never know the truth." The images wouldn't go away just because I retreated to my apartment. Besides, my therapist's voice nudged me, "You're not powerless. You can handle discomfort." I took a steadying breath. "No, I'm okay. I'll just take a few minutes." I put on a half smile. "Go entertain the guests." "I'll be fine." Mike nodded slowly. "All right. But holler if you need anything. This day is supposed to be fun." "Fine." "Right." As he left, I caught a glimpse of his eyes lingering on me. Was it worry or something else? My stomach flipped. "Don't be ridiculous," I told myself. I'd known my brother my entire life. The horrifying vision of him grinning above a knife, it had to be a twisted hallucination. Because the alternative, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Still, I had to know more. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Shed. After another few minutes calming down, I decided to rejoin everyone outside. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks. People were loosening up, the kids running around, aunts and uncles sipping drinks, the music a little louder. Mike joked with one cousin about fishing trips. It all looked so normal, so ordinary. Could all my panic have been a simple anxiety attack? But the thought of that phantom memory kept gnawing at me. Women's faces, a knife, a whirring machine. And especially the final flash, my brother's face. I drifted near the house, hugging the perimeter of the yard. By chance, I glanced at the side of the property where a small shed stood. I remembered Mike bragging about that shed when he first bought the farmhouse. "Gonna store all my tools in there. Maybe set up a workshop." The door was padlocked, if I recalled, but now it stood slightly ajar. Curiosity tugged at me. He must have left it open while rummaging for grilling supplies. My heart thudded as I stared at it. I took a cautious step, glancing around to see if anyone was watching me. They weren't. So I moved toward the shed. I told myself it was perfectly innocent. Just a quick peek to confirm there was nothing suspicious, that all these visions were in my head. But I knew I was crossing a line. If Mike found me snooping, there'd be an argument at best. Still, I had to do it. As I approached, the hair on my arms prickled. The door creaked softly when I eased it open. The air inside smelled of sawdust and motor oil. The single window was dusty, letting in only a beam of waning sunlight. I saw a workbench with a half-assembled lawnmower engine, some rusted tools hanging on hooks, and a chest freezer in the corner. My eyes snagged on that freezer. I'd never known Mike to freeze large quantities of anything. He prided himself on using fresh ingredients, especially for his barbecues. But it's not that weird to have a chest freezer, I reasoned. Plenty of folks keep extra meat or ice. Yet, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling over my skin. I inched closer. The top was firmly shut, a big padlock dangling open on the latch, as though it had been locked recently, but was now left undone. My chest tightened. I recalled the machinery whirring in my visions. Was that a freezer hum? Or a different machine entirely? I reached out, gloved fingertips brushing the lid. I felt an almost electrical jolt of revulsion. Don't do this, a rational part of me warned. You might see something you can't unsee. but my hand moved anyway, lifting the lid. Cold air swirled out, and I found myself staring at lumps of butcher paper wrapped packages. Each was labeled with a date. The earliest date was 3 months ago, and the latest was just a few days prior. The labels read things like, "Rump Chuck Steak," scrawled in permanent marker. My stomach flipped. I reached out, ignoring the panic rushing through my veins, and carefully peeled back one corner of the butcher paper on the topmost package. It was dark red meat. A normal person wouldn't be able to distinguish it from standard beef. But something inside me, "No, this can't be." "What are you doing here?" came a voice from behind me. I nearly dropped the package. Spinning around, I found Mike standing in the doorway, the last rays of sun illuminating his silhouette. I couldn't see his expression, but his posture was tense. Sorry," I stammered, scrambling to close the lid. "I just saw the door was open and—" Mike exhaled, stepping inside. "I must have forgotten to lock it," he said, looking at the freezer. His voice was carefully neutral. "I don't usually let guests poke around the shed." I forced a weak laugh. "I'm not poking around." I was curious. "This is new, right?" He nodded slowly, stepping closer. "Yeah, I've been doing more personal butchering." He paused, eyes flicking to the freezer. "Fresh from local farms. You know me, always a do-it-yourself type." Despite the cool evening air, sweat beaded on my neck. Personal butchering. The words clanged in my head. Combined with my visions, my anxiety soared off the charts. "Right," I said, swallowing. "Makes sense." An awkward silence stretched. He turned to me with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to hold his gaze. Part of me wanted to scream, "What are you hiding?" Another part shrank in terror. If there was even a fraction of truth to my visions. "I'm fine," I murmured. "Just overstimulated. You know how crowds freak me out." Mike studied me a moment. Then he nodded. "Sure. Well, come on. We're about to cut the cake." I glanced at the freezer one last time, noticing the butcher paper that I had slightly unwrapped. The edges parted just enough to reveal a dark marble texture that looked suspiciously like. No, I couldn't let my mind go there. Not yet. I followed Mike out, heart pounding so hard I felt faint. All around us, the yard was full of warmth and laughter. A few relatives were indeed slicing into a chocolate sheet cake. My parents were discussing some retirement plan with Uncle George. Everything looked heartbreakingly normal. Yet in my mind, I kept hearing that horrifying whir of machinery and seeing that phantom woman's terror. The biggest question loomed like a thundercloud. What if Mike's meat was something other than beef or pork? Chapter 4. Unwanted Visions. The party continued into the evening, a rosy sunset giving way to stars. Lanterns were hung around the yard, and Mike started a bonfire in a stone pit, coaxing up flames that crackled and danced. People gathered with marshmallows and guitar music. It should have been idyllic, but I couldn't shake the dread coiling in my gut. Every time I caught Mike's eye across the yard, a chill shot through me. He smiled, easygoing as ever. And yet, my instincts blared alarm bells. I considered leaving. My car was parked up the dirt driveway by the mailbox. But my parents would notice. They'd fuss, ask questions, or worse, want me to stay the night if they thought I was unwell. For my own sanity, I needed to keep this quiet until I had proof, if there was proof at all. Could I be wrong? I sat by the fire, sipping a soda, trying to appear casual. Aunt Barbara plopped down next to me. "You missed the cake cutting, Han," she said, with her usual bright tone. "Sorry," I lied. "Needed a breather." She patted my shoulder, thankfully, over my shirt, so no skin contact. I understand. Big gatherings can be overwhelming. Then she lowered her voice. Is everything all right with you and Mike? I saw you two talking in the shed. You looked upset. My heart thudded. No. Just, you know how I am, I said, forcing a smile. She gave me a worried look, but nodded. She changed the subject to something about her crocheting group, and I mumbled the right words to appear interested. Inside, my thoughts churned. I need to confirm the truth. Eventually, the party began to wind down. Relatives started taking their children home. The older folks declared they couldn't stay up too late. By midnight, only a handful remained, me, Mike, Uncle George, and a couple of cousins. Aunt Barbara had left, after giving me one last concerned glance. Mike insisted that Uncle George and the cousins crash in the living room. Everyone was too buzzed to drive. I, meanwhile, debated. If I left, I'd lose my chance to investigate. Investigate what? The mere word felt absurd. Was I truly suspecting my own brother of what, murder? Cannibalism? Yes. That's exactly what the vision suggested. I must be insane, I thought for the 100th time. Hey! Mike's voice startled me. He stood behind me, near the dying embers of the bonfire. You staying over too? I hesitated, swallowing. Maybe, I said, trying to sound casual. I'm tired. He nodded, his face unreadable in the shadows. There's a spare bed upstairs. He paused. Might be nice for us to hang out in the morning. We haven't caught up in ages. My heart hammered. Sure, I said, though every nerve screamed to flee. That sounds good. And so, around 12:30 a.m., Uncle George and the cousins crashed on couches and recliners. Mike showed me to a small guest room upstairs, cozy enough, with a single bed, wooden dresser, and a lamp. He bade me good night, and his smile was still so warm, so normal. Sleep well, he said softly, shutting the door behind him. I flopped onto the mattress, fully clothed, mind racing. What now? Wait until he sleeps, then check the shed again? Or search the house for more clues? Clues to what, exactly? If my vision was correct, the truth would be unspeakable. Better to be sure than to live with nightmares and doubts forever, said a grim voice inside me. After about an hour, I mustered the courage to slip out of bed. The house had gone quiet, with only the faint hush of the central air. I crept downstairs, each step agonizingly loud in the silence. In the living room, the silhouettes of Uncle George and two cousins were sprawled on couches, snoring softly. Mike was nowhere in sight. My plan was to revisit the shed, maybe open more packages, see if any physical evidence suggested. No, don't think about it. I quietly unlocked the back door and stepped into the moonlit yard. The air was cooler now, the grass damp with dew. A sliver of moonlight illuminated the shed. With each step I took, my pulse pounded heavier. The door was still closed, presumably locked. I reached out, heart in my throat, and tried the handle. Locked. Damn it, I whispered. I considered rummaging around for a spare key, but realized how noisy that might be. Could Mike be watching from a window right now? I circled the shed, checking if the small window on the side was unlocked. It was latched from the inside. No luck. My mind raced. Maybe the kitchen had a second key, or the workshop. I debated returning to the house. A faint glow inside the shed made me freeze. Wait, a light? I pressed my ear to the wooden siding. A dull hum vibrated within. It reminded me of a refrigerator motor or freezer compressor humming away. Had it been this loud earlier? I couldn't recall. Then I heard a noise I couldn't mistake, a muffled thud, like something dropping onto a hard surface. My blood ran cold. Was someone inside? Mike? Or was it my imagination? Every cell in my body shrieked that I needed to get out of there. I spun to go back, only to hear footsteps in the grass behind me. Before I could turn, a hand clamped over my mouth. My scream died in my throat. Chapter 5. Truth in the Dark. I thrashed instinctively, elbowing backward, but whoever grabbed me was strong. Another arm pinned me by the waist, lifting me off the ground. I kicked, heart pounding like a war drum. Then the person hissed in my ear, "Stop! It's me!" The hand slid from my mouth. I stumbled forward and whipped around, fists raised. In the faint moonlight, I saw the face of my cousin Jared, eyes wide with alarm. "What the hell, Jared?" I gasped, the adrenaline still surging in my veins. He swallowed, scanning the yard nervously. "I saw you sneaking out," he whispered. I don't know what I thought. Are you insane? If Mike catches you..." He cut himself off, biting his lip. My mind reeled. "Wait, what do you mean if Mike catches me? What do you know?" His expression flashed with fear. "Shh, keep it down," he said, glancing toward the house. Then in a hushed tone he added, "I've stayed here before, all right? A few weeks back, I crashed for the weekend. I heard things at night, coming from that shed. And Mike gave me some story about a new butchering hobby, but it felt off. I tried to forget it, but I can't." My pulse hammered. "You suspect something too?" He nodded slowly. "But I'm not sure what. I've seen him carrying huge trash bags out into the woods late at night. Once, I found a hair tie on the ground by his truck, stained with something dark. When I tried asking him, he gave me this look. I can't explain it. This is messed up." A nauseating swirl of relief and terror filled me. So I wasn't alone. Another family member had suspicions about Mike. "We have to open the shed," I whispered. "He's got it locked. I think the key might be in the house." Jared hesitated, glancing at the faint light under the shed door. "You sure you want to know?" I swallowed hard, remembering the horrifying visions of women's faces. "I can't keep ignoring it. We have to find answers." My voice trembled. "And if we're wrong, at least we'll know we're just paranoid. But if we're right..." He nodded, looking grim. "All right, let's do it fast. I think Mike crashed in his bedroom, but he might still be awake." The two of us slipped back into the house. The living room snores were undisturbed. The kitchen was dark, but Jared flicked on a small flashlight he'd brought from his jacket. We rummaged through the drawers, searching quietly for anything that might unlock the shed. In the third drawer, hidden under some dish towels, I found a small ring of keys, 5 or 6. My breath caught. "One of these might be it," I whispered. Then a soft creak on the stairs made us both freeze. Light footsteps sounded above us on the second floor. Jared snapped off the flashlight. We huddled behind the kitchen counter, hearts thumping. I fought the urge to run. After a long, tension-filled minute, the footsteps retreated. A door closed. Silence. Jared exhaled, flipping the flashlight back on. "Let's go," he whispered. We slipped outside again, crossing the lawn in a half-crouch. The house loomed behind us like an ominous sentinel. At the shed door, Jared tried the first key. Nothing. The second key stuck, but wouldn't turn. The third key clicked, and the lock popped open. Carefully, we swung the door outward. Inside, the single bulb cast eerie shadows across the walls. The chest freezer hummed louder now. My stomach clenched. I pointed. "Let's check the freezer." Even as I said it, a dreadful certainty weighed on my chest, telling me exactly what we'd find. Jared and I crept forward. The freezer's lid was shut, locked with that same padlock we'd seen before, but left undone. Jared swallowed. I'll open it, he said, voice barely above a breath. You keep watch. I stood by the shed door, peering out at the yard. My heart was in my throat. The night was still, the moon partially hidden by clouds. Then came the soft click of the lid opening. A few seconds later, Jared's sharp intake of breath told me everything. I turned to see him stepping back from the freezer, face ashen. "Oh God," he whispered, voice trembling. "Oh my God." I forced myself to step closer. The butcher paper wrap packages had been rearranged, likely after dinner. Many were labeled with dates and cuts, but a few were open, revealing hunks of raw, bloodied flesh that in no way resembled normal cuts of beef or pork. They had a human-like curvature to them, an unmistakable shape of part of an arm, a thigh. I felt my stomach twist savagely. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. My entire body shook with revulsion. It's real. My visions. Mike's. Fresh meat. He's been butchering people. Jared stumbled away, nearly toppling into the workbench. "This can't be," he croaked. "Mike's he's family. How could, why would?" Tears burned my eyes. "He's done something horrible," I rasped. "All those breakups, the girlfriends who never reappeared, the local rumors about missing women." My voice choked off. Was he hunting them? My mind reeled. "We have to call the police," I whispered. "Right now." Jared nodded desperately, fumbling for his phone. "No service," he hissed after a frantic moment. "No bars. I can try outside, further away from the house." Suddenly, a deeper shadow fell across the shed doorway. Before we could react, Mike stepped inside. He closed the door softly behind him, locking it with a click. In the cramped shed, his presence felt massive, looming over us. He wore a calm expression, but his eyes gleamed with something unhinged. Jared started to speak, but Mike moved faster than I'd ever seen. He slammed Jared into the workbench. The flashlight clattered to the floor. Mike pinned Jared's wrist with one hand while drawing something from his belt with the other, a large, wicked-looking hunting knife. I gasped, stumbling backward, my shoulders smacking into the chest freezer. The cold metal pressed into my spine. My mind spun. Do something. But all I could do was stare in horror, heart pounding so violently I thought I'd black out. Jared let out a strangled yell, thrashing. Mike pressed the blade to Jared's throat. "You shouldn't have looked," Mike hissed, voice eerily calm. He cut his gaze to me. "Neither of you should have looked. But now you know." Blood roared in my ears. "Mike, please," I managed. "I don't. Why would you?" He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Because I like it," he said simply. "I always have. You think I got rid of my girlfriends because they were clingy? Some of them were, but I had other reasons." He flashed a grin that made my skin crawl. "And you all ate well today, right? You enjoyed the burgers?" Jared gagged, face twisted with revulsion. A tear slid down his cheek. "You sick," he spat, but Mike pressed the knife tighter, cutting off his words. I realized with numbing horror that none of my relatives suspected a thing. They'd all gone home happy, bellies full of beef. Meanwhile, in the shed, the monster was about to kill us for discovering the truth. My breath came in rapid bursts. I felt the corner of the freezer pressing my lower back. My hand groped behind me, searching for anything, any weapon. Then my fingers brushed a metal rod, maybe part of a tool. I seized it, tried not to make a sound. "Mike," I said, voice shaking, "don't do this." I prayed to buy a few seconds. "You're my brother. We can help you." "We won't." He barked a laugh. "You don't get it. I don't want help. I want to keep doing what I do. And now that you both know," he shrugged, "I'll make it quick at least. That was all I needed to hear. Summoning what little courage I had, I lunged forward and swung the metal rod. I missed his head, but struck his shoulder, jarring him enough that Jared could jerk away from the knife. Mike roared with anger, turning on me. Jared seized the moment to grab a wrench from the workbench. He swung it wildly, catching Mike on the forearm. The knife clattered to the ground. Mike cursed, staggering back against the chest freezer. Panting, I scrambled toward the shed door, fumbling with the lock. My fingers shook so badly I could barely align the key. Meanwhile, Jared tried to wrestle Mike, both of them grunting and slamming into the workbench. Tools clanked to the ground. The overhead light flickered. Finally, the padlock clicked open. I flung the door wide, screaming, "Jared, come on!" He shoved Mike off him with a burst of strength, then sprinted outside. I slammed the door shut behind us, jamming the lock from the outside with the key. It probably wouldn't hold for long, but it might slow Mike down. We tore across the yard, gasping, hearts in our throats. The main house was an option, but Uncle George and our cousins were in there, sleeping unaware. We can't lead Mike to them. We had no phone signal, no immediate help. We needed the road, the neighbors, someone. "Car," Jared panted. "Your car. Let's go!" We sprinted around the side of the house, gravel crunching underfoot. My old sedan sat near the mailbox, lit faintly by a distant street lamp. We heard furious pounding behind us, probably Mike escaping the shed. My arms pumped, adrenaline fueling every step. We reached my car, yanking the doors open. I fumbled for my keys, and shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. Jared kept watch behind us. "Hurry!" he gasped. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Headlights flared, illuminating the empty road ahead. We peeled out, tires skidding on gravel, as a figure sprinted around the corner of the house. Mike. His mouth was open in a silent snarl. "Go, go, go!" Jared yelled. I stomped the accelerator, and we barreled down the dark country road, leaving the farmhouse behind. My entire body shook. My face was wet with tears. In the rearview mirror, I caught a final glimpse of my brother standing in the middle of the road, chest heaving, the knife back in his hand. Headlights illuminated his furious, twisted features. Then we rounded a bend, and he disappeared. Chapter 6, Aftermath. We finally got a phone signal about 2 miles away. Jared called the police, voice trembling as he tried to explain. We need officers at 118 Lakeside Road. There's a man, my cousin. He's been killing people. He fed us." His voice broke. I took over, trying to provide details through my sobs. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, but our hysteria must have convinced her something was seriously wrong. She promised to send units right away. We pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station, huddling together in the glare of the neon lights. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Jared was pale as a sheet. We sat on a curb, waiting for the police to arrive, to pick us up, to do something. An hour later, we rode in the back of a patrol car, leading officers to Mike's house. Light was just breaking over the horizon. More cruisers arrived, red and blue lights slicing through the dawn. But when the police stormed the property, guns drawn, the house was empty. Uncle George and the cousins were still asleep, clueless. They woke in a panic at the sight of cops rummaging through the kitchen and living room. Mike was gone. The shed door had been forced open from the inside, the padlock splintered. But the evidence was there. The chest freezer, the butcher paper, the horrifying lumps of human flesh. The police roped the property off with yellow tape. Forensic teams began scouring every inch, and the entire family found themselves in the middle of a nightmare. Mom and Dad arrived within an hour, frantic, demanding answers. They found me trembling in the back of an ambulance, Jared at my side, both of us wrapped in blankets. Officers hovered around, taking statements, looking grim. The story broke the family's hearts. Our golden boy, the perfect Mike, was a monster who'd butchered who knows how many victims. Our relatives reeled in denial. I was too numb to speak. My final shred of hope was that they'd catch him soon. He can't hide forever. Days turned into weeks. The local news had a field day with the barbecue butcher. Police identified some remains as missing women from nearby counties. Our entire family was in shock. Some tried to contact Mike, but his number was disconnected. He'd vanished without a trace. It was as though he'd planned for this moment all along. The guilt ate me alive. Could I have stopped him sooner? My parents blamed themselves, too. We all reeled under the horror, the betrayal. To this day, months later, Mike is still on the run. Occasionally, news sightings pop up in faraway states. Rumors swirl. The FBI got involved, plastering his face on wanted posters. But they haven't nailed him yet. I've returned to therapy, dealing not only with my touch visions, but the nightmares of what I saw in that freezer, what I ate at that barbecue, and the knowledge that I almost died by my brother's hand. I keep my gloves on more than ever now. Physical contact is even more terrifying, since I know what I might discover. And sometimes I sense him, my brother. I get flickers, maybe illusions, maybe real psychic echoes. I see him crouched in some new hideout, a grin twisting his lips as he preps a slab of unknown meat. I see new victims' faces, and I wonder, how many more has he lured in since then? Because in my dreams, when I ask him what kind of meat he's butchering, he just smiles and says, "It's a mix." Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and click the bell.